Half a day. The Committee on Education, Air Transportation, and Statistics Research and Planning will now convene this informational briefing. Today is Thursday, March 21st, 2020, and the time is currently 10:33 a.m. In accordance with open government law, the public notices of this hearing were disseminated to all senators, stakeholders, and main media broadcasting outlets on Wednesday, May 13, 2020, and Monday, May 18, 2020. Notice of the briefing was also available on the Guam Legislature website. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to please ensure your audio is muted unless you are speaking. Keep your cameras on and ensure you are visible for the duration of the hearing. And please speak clearly. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please call our office 989-7696 so that we can assist you. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my colleagues for being here. Senator Shelton, thank you. Senator Therese Terlahi, thank you very much. Senator Lee, Senator Clint Rigel, Senator Pito, Senator Pito Terlahi, Senator Jocelyn Augustine, and Senator Kelly Marsh Teichno, and Minority Leader Senator Telo Twaidegui. Thank you for being present for today's informational hearing. I'd like to acknowledge Superintendent John Fernandez and team. Thank you for being here today as well. The purpose of this briefing is to discuss the Guam Department of Education's role in the COVID-19 outbreak, as well as planning for the next school year. On the agenda today, we have the following items: the Guam Department of Education's payment status of limited term employees, grab and go meal program. Congratulations and thank you all. You did a wonderful job at that. Distance learning and the school year 2020 to 2021. Okay. Now I'll give it over to the superintendent to go ahead and introduce his team from the Guam Department of Education. And then I believe you have a briefing that the board and yourself would like to present to the panel. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And I also like to acknowledge Ms. Chairwoman Maria Gutierrez. Thank you, Chairwoman of the board, for being present today.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Again, I'm joined today by several members of the team, but let me start by again recognizing our Chairwoman, Ms. Maria Gutierrez, of our board, and our, of course, board member, Dr. Ron McNinch. And then based on the instructions we provided, there were several board members who wanted to monitor, but they will be monitoring on their YouTube channel live. And so I know that our board members are also monitoring, even though they're not here on the Zoom chat. Also joining us today, Deputy Superintendent Kelly Sokola, Deputy Superintendent Stacy Coletta, Deputy Superintendent Joe Sanchez, and Deputy Superintendent Zenny Ascension. And then also we have Nadine Cepeda, our district psychologist. So you earlier sent, and I appreciate it, your questions in advance relative to the limited duty employees, our grab and go meals, our school nurses, and also just the planning that's going into the next school year. Obviously, we still are in the midst of our COVID-19 pandemic. We're still under a state of public health emergency. So we really want to thank you for the attention being paid to those members of the Department of Education who are contributing to the response, and then also to those who we have working on our recovery plan to get us ready for the school year. So I'm happy to talk about any of those items in any way you like. If you'd like me to go, we do have that letter. I know that was circulated around with our responses. And I'm happy to just give a brief summary response to each, and then we can maybe go into any questions and further questions that you have. So the first question was really the payment of our status of our limited term employees, both full-time and part-time. So our limited term employees are approximately 750 employees who are limited term, and those are our hourly employees. Those include our school aides, our one-to-one school aides. Those include our teacher assistants, our on-call substitutes. So all of these employees continue to be paid on a biweekly basis. They're being paid on the basis of the hours they're authorized to earn during a normal school year, and we continue to pay them. Obviously, in a normal situation, there would be questions about hourly employees being paid when they're not at work. But based on the executive order 2020-05, We do have the authority to continue with our limited term employees in the locally funded positions. And on our federally funded positions, we sought guidance whether federal funds could continue to be used to support our hourly employees. And they basically gave us a guidance that so long as there is a local, that you're able to pay your local hourly employees based on your local rules and regulations, then you are able and authorized to pay your federal employees. So they continue to be paid. There are a number of employees who will soon term, which is they will soon complete their contractual terms of the department, at the end of the school year, and some go into the summer over the summer school period. But those would be the normal conditions under which they would normally be employed. So we were very happy and willing to ensure that they were not thrust into dire circumstances due to the pandemic. And we were very careful to make sure we had the authority to continue supporting these employees. And actually, many of them are actually some of our employees that are out at our grab and go school meals operations. So we want to thank them as well for not only continuing to work with us, but going out and putting themselves at risk to help support the community. So the second question was the grab and go school meals. Yesterday, we announced that we have the authority to extend the grab and go school meals basically until July 31st is the authority that we've been given from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The grab and go school meals program is simply the normal school meals program that you would normally serve to students and breakfast and lunch at the school sites. But given the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shutdown that soon came thereafter, we were able to work immediately in the week after closure to seek a waiver of certain requirements that would allow us to transition from in-school meals to drive-through distribution at our school sites. And those waivers were to essentially to allow us to serve food out of in a non-congregate setting. So obviously that's important right now when we're trying to enforce social distancing and we're unable to operate schools. So with that in mind, we've been keeping our USDA regional office informed, but they've been very supportive and flexible in allowing us to continue this service. We are currently serving 12,000 breakfasts and 12,000 lunches at 12 schools, and continuing to monitor the amount of meals that are in demand by the community. But aside from some early traffic situations and just coordination situations, it all seems to now be going smoothly with the adjustments that we've been able to make. We want to thank our mayors as very much for their support in making sure that they've supporting the traffic situations and also ensuring that any meals that are not distributed at the site get to those students in need. So I'll thank them, and also GPD and all those partners who've made it work. And again, that program will go into July 31st at this point. The third question was whether it was regarding the employees who work at grab and go meals and their compensation. Basically, they are being compensated at the 15% differential level based on the executive order. So we did follow. I recognize there was a lot of discussion about the compensation levels and double pay and so forth. At this point, we are following the DOA guidance regarding the differential pay, which right now would allow them to earn their normal base salary plus the 15% differential. We spent some time catching up on payment because when it first started, we were not quite certain as to which agency and who would pay and whether we needed to wait for federal reimbursement. But soon thereafter, we clarified that it would be better for us to go ahead and pay the differential and seek reimbursement later on in the process. So as of the last pay period, our 15% and also our 25% differential earners were getting paid that differential. And so those 25% employees would cover our nurses, as well as our school attendance officers and social workers who are on the front lines of the pandemic. So for nurses, number 4 was a question about nurses. There was some confusion early on when the nurses were pulled to work for public health. But again, at this point, DOE is paying for their differential at 25%, and we will be seeking reimbursement from the Department of Administration for those amounts. to be repaid to GDOE. Those nurses are assigned to public health, to the community health centers, to the port, to the airport, as well as to the Guam Memorial Hospital. So all of them are on the front lines, supporting the island's efforts to contain COVID-19. The fifth question was with regard to employees who work at a school site testing positive for COVID-19. So I wasn't sure whether you meant on an ongoing basis when we come back to the school year or presently, but we did have a situation, I know all of you are well aware of FB Leon Guerrero, where we did have an employee who was diagnosed as positive based on contact tracing that came from an external, a separate incident. So out of an abundance of caution, that employee did not report to work once diagnosed, but we did move forward working with Sodexo and our employees. They happened to have a mass testing going on in Estumbo. We were able to get them to the Estumbo site to be tested. The information we have is that all employees tested negative, but were required anyway to go through a 14-day quarantine. And so that period ended, just last week. And then, of course, the requirements to ensure the cleaning of the facility just to make sure that we were ready to reopen. So in that situation, definitely following the guidance of public health, obviously testing the quarantine and isolation requirements that would be put in place based on their diagnosis, and also, ensuring that the adequate cleaning of the facility to be able to open again. And then finally, I know this is the question everybody's asking now as we pivot from our response to recovery, is the planning for next school year. So at this point, what I can say right now is we do have a recovery task force that has been appointed. Deputy Superintendent Joe Sanchez and Deputy Stacy Coletta are the co-chairs of this recovery effort. They are organized and supported by numerous administrators, teachers, and staff. And there are 6 committees right now working on the following: on school operations, safety, and social distancing, on curriculum and distance learning, school personnel management, social, emotional, mental health, and well-being supports, and then community relations and public information. So these are the 6 main committees that are at work right now, working through the details of obviously the massive job of trying to figure out how to continue our mission of teaching and learning for 30,000 students in 41 facilities while operating in a safe environment. So safety is our primary concern, of course, and we're leading with that. We're looking at all the necessary issues that need to be addressed in terms of cleaning facilities, purchasing personal protective equipment, looking at cleaning supplies, and setting those cleaning protocols in order to make sure that facilities are safe. We're looking at the requirement for social distancing and the possibility that we'll have to use, at this point, we'll call it alternate scheduling, in order to ensure that we don't have all of our students on campus at one time, but still be able to combine in-class and distance learning to pursue their education. We know that with personnel, we want to make sure our employees are safe. We want to make sure that they can continue to perform their duties and responsibilities. At the same time, we also are aware that with all the public health guidance that we're getting, we know that employees are concerned about their safety, about their health, and should they have particular conditions that make them susceptible or in a high risk category. We're working through those issues right now to determine how we can provide the necessary accommodations to employees who meet these characteristics and are concerned about their health. And then finally, not finally, I think, Madam Vice Speaker, I know I texted you earlier. You did send a separate letter regarding mental health supports. I apologize that the response is in draft and will be to you by Monday, but we do have Nadine Cepeda, our district psychologist, who is chiefly responsible for helping us to design those plans and activities. And so we're happy to engage in that discussion as to where we are. And then finally, I think the most important piece of this, not more important than safety, but definitely important in keeping our stakeholders up to speed, is really the information that's being put out. So our plan is to ensure that as we get to a point, and I think we're at this point over this past week, when we get to a point that we're able to more regularly provide information to the public, we'll be doing that in a regular fashion as we typically do when we're dealing with very important issues. So right now, we are planning to schedule more public briefings for media, as well as interactions with our stakeholders, including our parents, students, and other interested parties. And so this is just part of it with regard to the legislature holding this briefing. This may be this will be a helpful part of letting our community know where we stand in terms of preparations for next year. So with that, that generally summarizes the response that you also have in writing. And we're happy to take any questions and see what we can do to respond with the information. And if we don't have the information, to be able to incorporate that into our plan. Thank you.
Okay, I believe some of my colleagues have questions at this time. And so I'll go ahead and invite Legislative Secretary Senator Shelton. Do you have questions?
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you so much to Superintendent. Thank you. And Madam Chairwoman Gutierrez, thank you for being here and for all the support staff who are also on the line. And thank you for what you continue to do, especially with the grab and go meals and all of the transitions that you're working right now. I know you talked about the DOE nurses, superintendent, and where they are detailed now. And do you know how long they will continue to be detailed to those community health centers, the port, the airport?
So our nurses are typically work during the school year, and then after the school year, they are no longer required to report. So my latest discussion, and this was with the Lieutenant Governor, was that with regard to the school nurses, based on not only our relationship with our employees, but also our contractual obligations based on the collective bargaining agreement, the nurses have essentially fulfilled their duties and responsibilities relative to the school year. So in the event that, it's our understanding, in the event that if the governor is calling on them to report as part of the emergency response, our recommendation was that they be allowed to be hired directly for that particular time period directly by public health or the relevant agencies who require their support. So in that way, DOE has fulfilled our responsibility with regard to their duties, responsibilities, and their compensation, and they would be allowed to work directly with these other agencies over the course of the summer, should their services be needed. Additionally, if and when we get back to the school year, that's going to be a separate discussion with regard to how we might be work to establish an on-call type of status should there be a second wave or another need for school nurses to be pulled from school to go to these other agencies. That's a discussion we have not yet moved. That has not yet moved so far, but at least for the summer, we're allowing our nurses, if they'd like to work, to go directly to fill out an application with DOA for that part-time temporary duty.
Okay, and I know that they are detailed there right now, but I'm wondering, do you know if they're being tested right now?
I'm not sure about their testing status. I do know that based on that there have been nurses who have been tested, but my understanding is that is related to particular incidents or contact tracing that would normally go on when somebody tests positive. I don't believe there is a mass testing of nurses yet, but obviously we're standing by to see when there's capacity to do that.
Okay, and what about the other employees who are at the other grab and go sites aside from the FBLG employees? Have any of them been tested?
So there is no mass or mandated testing going on for any of our employees. Obviously, we're concerned that that there's an overall capacity issue with testing, and based on public health guidance, we understand that those who are symptomatic or who may have been in contact with a COVID-19 positive individual would be prioritized. So we haven't been in a position to either require or to anticipate mass testing for our employees, and I know that was a concern earlier. Now, definitely on an individual basis, should they feel that they have symptoms, obviously they're not allowed to come and participate in the operation if they do have symptoms, and we encourage them to definitely go to their healthcare providers. But that would be on an individual basis, and then obviously if they do test positive we would encourage them to follow the advice of their doctors and public health.
Okay, thank you for that. And Madam Chair, if I may ask one more question during this round, for maybe Nadine or for you, Superintendent, I'm wondering, I know that you discussed a little bit about the mental health support for our students, but are we providing any mental health support for the employees who are continuing to work and the nurses who are detailed to these other areas?
So currently, so obviously with mental health, it makes it very difficult to provide those services to employees and students when your facilities are essentially closed and operations have ceased. So right now, we have not been providing mental health services directly to employees or the nurses. We have been in contact with behavioral health, and obviously are working with them to try to give more visibility to their hotline. In terms of anyone who does feel the need to seek support and services. With regard to our mental health services, I know our clinicians have reached out to many of our high-risk students or at-risk students to follow up on them since this pandemic started. However, I think a lot more needs to be done as we prepare ourselves to get through the summer and to enter the school year. So if I would ask, can I ask Nadine to add a little bit further in terms of our planning for the coming year?
Sure.
He is actually a co-chair or a chair of our committee dealing with the social emotional situation. Thank you, Nadine.
Senator Shelton and other vice chair and all the other senators. So we have put in planned different phases, 3 different phases that's being proposed. We have reached out, like our superintendent said, with current high-risk students, we have been calling, following up. Some of them have been texting and WhatsApping, whatever form or medium that it works for them, that's how we've been reaching out. And I did share with the superintendent some serious cases we had to refer, a lot of consultation during these difficult times. We've actually had to provide some more intensive telehealth therapy over the, I'm gonna say over the phone. And provide some guidance for the families. What we do have, we have the first phase, and we're looking at, and this is done in many other districts that they're part of the planning, it's just gonna require a whole media kind of campaign. A lot of times people hear things and it starts to have people panic. What we're seeing is feelings of loss, grief, anxiety, depression, and trauma are the most reported feelings and issues that are coming up with our adolescents, to include adults with the pandemic. And so to address this is to have the information, a fact sheet, coping tips that would be given to the students, parents, and our staff so they can take care of themselves. And when that comes, part of the things we want to do is definitely provide a lot of training. How does identify these kids that are at high risk? It may be internal or external, which means it comes out in behavior. We often don't see that because it's kind of difficult and it requires a lot of training. So heavily on training on different, for the counselors, what we're proposing is a screening tool for those 3 areas: trauma, anxiety, and depression. And that's for both children and adolescents, to include adults. So what we're proposing is when the re-entry comes back, when we return to school, or if some of them can't come in, if we see that we're gonna, again, train the teachers, the frontline staff, they are referred to the counselors. The counselors will be trained in these specific screeners. And then if it requires, based on the score, it requires more specialized skills, it then comes to us, which are the clinicians from DOE. I just spoke to Carissa Pangolinan, the Deputy Director at Guam Behavioral Health. We have already had these partnerships and relationship. If they choose not to come to us because they have to consent for an assessment, they would have to then go to Guam Behavioral Health. We are really pushing a lot of the crisis hotline. We notice that our students actually, when they can't get over hold of us in the middle of the night, they are calling the crisis hotline. I was just told by the Deputy Director at Guam Behavioral Health, they are at the highest capacity right now with adults in the inpatient unit. Those numbers are not reported because, again, we always we don't really look at the importance of the wellness of people until something happens like a shootout. So we are taking an active approach, and how can we help not only our staff, and our students. But we have to think about families, because when the students go back home, it becomes the same thing, and we want to provide that support as well. And so part of this plan is when they return, they will then be screened by a counselor. And then if they need more services, they can come to us. And school, if they score low enough, then the school counselors, who, by the way, all have master's degree, are being trained on special areas. They can provide that support until they need more specialized services.
Okay, thanks so much, Nadine, for that answer. I really appreciate how you all are innovating to continue the care that you've been giving the students, and that you have this plan in place to help us transition. And so when it comes to your media campaign and getting the word out, I'd also like to offer our help from the legislature, whatever we can do on our side to promote that and to get the word out for you. We're willing to do that. And thank you, Madam Chair. I'll reserve my questions for the next round. I have a couple more.
Thank you, Legislative Secretary Amanda Shelton. I'd like to at this time acknowledge Senator Torres. Thank you for joining us. You joined us a while back and I kind of skipped over it, but thank you for being here. Did you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
I did. First of all, thank you, Nadine, for that very good briefing. That's very, very good to know. Superintendent Fernandez, I want to ask, you mentioned in preparation for the upcoming school year 2021, you have several committees that are looking at different areas of concern and interest. But have you also contemplated a possible surge in enrollments for this upcoming school year, given the economic downturn? And also, what is that period for enrollment in the public school system?
So let me go and start by answering by yes. Thank you, Senator Torres, for the questions. Yes, we're hearing anecdotally the possibility of increased enrollment from possibly from private schools in our area. Also, potentially from CNMI. So we're aware of that. At this point we don't have the numbers. I think. Let me ask our deputies, maybe Joe Sanchez, to talk a little bit about the planning for the possible enrollment and how that might impact the plans for scheduling and so forth. Deputy Joe.
Hey, thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Vice Speaker and Senators and Senator Torres. So yes, we are aware, again, as the superintendent noted anecdotally, that there may be a number of students coming over from the private schools and even from off island. So what we have is one of the first things that we need to do when these students register, which is going to be the same for all of our students, is to identify their capacity for distance learning. And part of it is, there's a whole bunch of other discussions around this, but a part of it is identifying their access to the internet, identifying their access to equipment that will allow them to do distance learning. And then from there, we will be categorizing these students into different groups and making them aware of this, so that we know who is able to do, let's say, for example, 100% online learning, because we've already had a number of parents and families who have contacted us and said that they don't want their students to come physically to campus. So for the different groups of students, the ones who have access, the ones who don't have access, and the ones kind of in between who may have access but inconsistent access, we have to identify strategies for each one of those groups. So that would be kind of the first step, is when they do register for the school system, identify what category they would be in, and then the principals will in turn work towards strategizing the different levels of supports that they would need. Because we're thinking that even though there may be an increase in the overall student population, that may not necessarily result in an overall increase in the students who are physically on campus. But again, without that hard data of who can do 100% online, or even willing to stay at home and do a paper-based curriculum that will allow them to stay home, we're operating off of the assumption that they will be physically on campus but split. So if I can just throw in that additional point, is we acknowledged already, based on the school capacity and the current population, that there is really no way to do social distancing if 100% of the student population were to attend school on that day. So
Right.
we're prepared for 3 scenarios: 50% capacity, 1/3 capacity, or even 1/4 capacity. And the schools are looking at their numbers right now to see what that looks like.
And if I may ask, have you also reconsidered the time frame, perhaps upping the deadline to register so that you have ample time to
Yeah.
to
If I
service
could,
everybody?
yes, if I could, Senator. So typically registration can begin at the end of the school year. And so right now, we do know that the documents should be online for registration for interested students and families who want to begin that process. We're just going to have to work out. Um, we're going to have to work out and clarify. And maybe this will be something we can put out to the public. So thank you for that suggestion. Just to be clear that if there's registration going on, that we're able to accept their registration at the school sites. So we'll put that on our list of things to do. If that sounds like a good question, we don't normally get a big surge, but in this particular time period, we should be prepared for that. So I think it makes sense to maybe make that an announcement that if you are going to register, here's where you can get the document, and then here's when you can register at your school. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the more that the public can do to make your job easier, the better for the whole community. So si Zeus maas.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Clint Rigel, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the Guam Department of Education and board members for participating, of course, and giving us the opportunity to ask questions. My question is for Superintendent Fernandez. I'm particularly interested in the Grab to Go program. First of all, allow me please to commend you for all you've done with the Grab to Go program. It's an amazing program, obviously, that's fed many, many people. And I think you guys are doing a wonderful job with that. And kudos to you and your team and all of the hard workers who've been out there on the front lines providing food to those who need it during these times. With that, I would like to mention that I've been meeting with a lot of local farmers over the past several weeks, and one of the issues the local farmers have brought to me, which I promised I would also bring up with you as well, is they would like to be included more somehow as far as if there's an ability for the Grab to Go program to purchase as much local produce as possible for the Grab to Go food program. I know the GDOE does procure some local produce through its vendors, Sodexo, and that you guys do try, but the feedback I'm getting from the farmers is that some of them feel more local produce could be purchased, and some of them felt that they were left out of the opportunity to sell local produce specifically for the Grab to Go program. So with that, I'd just like to ask you, what can be done to buy more local produce from the local farmers for the Grab to Go program and just for school lunches in general?
Well, thank you, Senator Bajal. I know you sent a letter earlier on behalf of the farmers whom you met with, and obviously you did read it because you understand that we do, in the normal course of the school year, we do engage to try to procure produce, and that includes both Sodexo, which serves 37 of our schools. I believe they are procuring cucumbers and lettuce as part of their as part of their role. And then, of course, we've been piloting just this year, piloting more opportunities for farmers to be incorporated into the planning and development of the school menus, and to be able to provide and plan for produce to be part of those school menus. These are for the 4 schools that are still locally run by our cafeteria workers. So we've made some progress, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think what's difficult is if you look across the country, you see that you hear news that the federal government has now moved and purchased all this produce from farmers, and now that's the reason why we're now getting shipments of that very same produce to Guam. So yesterday, when we were providing it was about 1,400 bags of commodities. That was in addition to boxes of the 10-pound boxes of, I think, apples and oranges as part of that. But these were produce that were shipped, that were basically sent in from the mainland to provide food support. So it is a strange kind of situation that our local farmers aren't in that chain as well. For Sodexo, typically we have a lot of requirements that typically need to be met and so forth. But in this situation, I think the best thing we can do is sit down with the Department of Agriculture to determine, if there's any way, outside of a normal circumstances, any way that we can move forward to figure out how to provide that support, if it's possible at all. So, we have a team on our food services that we can engage in this discussion. But I do agree with you that it's a strange thing where we can bring in boxes and boxes and boxes of produce, of fruits and vegetables from the mainland, but our farmers are saying that they're not able to, participate. So I'm happy to just continue that, forward that discussion. And I'd like to just bring Department of Agriculture, which really has a central role in this, together to see what we can do to accelerate that.
Absolutely, thank you. I've also been in discussion with the Department of Agriculture, so I'd like to, if we get the chance sometime, to sit down with, my office, Department of Agriculture, and your office, so we can work all of this out and help facilitate a way for more local farmers to participate in these programs. And I'm sure we can work it out if we sit down and figure it out.
And if I could add, Guido had been very instrumental as well in trying to help with the pilot, so perhaps they can get involved. I think they were helping in filling some of the gaps that were showing up in terms of making this work. So if they can be involved too, that might be a great way to see what we can do to respond.
Absolutely. Okay, I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Senator Clint. Senator Lee, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you all for joining us this morning. A huge shout out to GDOE just as a team. I really appreciate all of the work that you've been doing, especially with regard to distance learning at a time when we didn't really have much leeway to prepare. And also for all the work with the grab and go. I think that's been a real bright spot during this very difficult time for our entire island. I did want to thank Ms. Nadine Cepeda for the response to Senator Shelton with regard to mental health supports for not just our students, but also teachers and other folks and parents. Again, it's a really challenging time. So it was really great to hear about telehealth therapies, the coping tips. And Ms. Cepeda, if I could, I just want to ask that you please share any of this information with the legislature. We would love to partner with you to help get this info out. If we can use the Guam Legislature channel, our YouTube channel, other social media channels to help get this information out to our stakeholders, I think would be really important. So thank you for the work you're doing. Also, I'm seeing on this chat, I think Dr. Kelly Sokola had a message about facilitating registrations information. So I just wanted to give Dr. Kelly, if you want to let the committee know about information in the grab and go meals operations.
Sure, thank you very much. I just wanted to let you guys know that we're starting to facilitate registration packets for our Head Start families to be distributed through the grab and go sites, and also just a flyer information for kindergarten as well. These are very two difficult populations to get registered in a timely manner. Right. And we usually start in March and April to register kindergarten partners. So thank you. I just wanted to let you know that.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Superintendent, I wanted to, if I can, just ask, it's been brought to the attention of my office that the staffing levels at grab and go on campuses have kind of dwindled compared to the initial amount of volunteers. And I wanted to ask you, what is GDOE doing to ensure that enough staff are present to pass out meals within the allowed food safety time limit? Because we know that these meals are only good for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and we don't want anybody getting sick, especially for the reason that we don't have enough volunteers to get the food out. So can you just speak to that?
Okay, let me start, and let me see if Deputy Kelly, who is running the program, has anything to add. So it's always been my concern that anyone who works at grab and go be willing to do so without without being directed. We haven't ever gone and said you have to work at grab and go, because we understand there's a risk going out and providing the meals and doing so during this emergency situation. So we've been very, very thankful of having sufficient staff and schools that have been willing to, to continue to provide service. So I do know one of the issues that may be affecting attendance and willingness today is not only some of the safety issues, but I think also this discussion about pay. So I think this discussion about pay when some of these employees realize that, and again, nobody ever said this is what you're going to get paid, and I don't think they're doing it solely for the compensation. But I think when they ended up weighing the risk with, I think these guys are getting paid 15% differential, and many of them are hourly employees. So you're not talking about a major drop in the bucket for them when you're talking about 15% after going through weeks of supporting this humanitarian effort. So I think the news and the discussion and the debate about appropriate pay has affected the number of employees who are willing to go there on a daily basis. So we're monitoring those staffing levels. We do think that there are still employees who are willing to work, but I would have to say that that's kind of contributed to the morale of the employees. So let me see if Dr. Kelly, if there's any other factors that we're seeing at this point.
Thank you. Yes, it's really important to understand that when we started the grab and go meals with the 11 sites, that we asked employees to volunteer for setting up these sites. So we had the administrators and 12-month staff volunteer to go out and to set this up. And they really like going to work. They like doing what they're doing because they know it's a good thing for our community. The other thing is, it is difficult when we went to go stand up the 12th site. It was very hard to get the number of people to make that site run. And more so because we were in the particular phase that we were in with the pandemic. And we have a lot of employees that are at risk, and we have a lot of fear, of course, in our community, right? That they don't want to go out and they don't want the exposure. So we did get the 12th site set up. And then right now we're getting to the end of the year, the actual school year. And so we're having some of those employees end based on their contract year. And so we're looking at which sites need those extra supports. So the principals themselves are letting me know, and then I'm getting the additional staff to volunteer. And now that we're in phase 2, we do have more employees willing to volunteer and to go to the sites and to help. I think also when FBLG experienced what they did, it kind of shook everyone up too about our employees having to be tested and shut down, right? So that was kind of a reality that got people to step back, and even some did not want to come back to work. I want to also say that we have the AmeriCorps volunteers that have really been helping us at our sites, and they've been there from the beginning, and they're going to continue all the way through July 31st, which is our end date. So we're managing the 12 sites, and we're ensuring that we do have enough employees. So I know that you brought up the concern about the meals and whether or not we're pushing the meals out in a timely manner. One of the things is that Sodexo prepares the meals right then and there and packs the meals, and then we get them out. So they're really not just sitting around, and we're watching the temperatures and all of the safety rules that we need to follow. And we're getting them out as quickly as we can, but also the traffic flow and everything. I think by this time we are going into our 9th week that the school sites have managed everything. And now that we're also in phase 2, we're seeing kind of a lull sometimes in the numbers and in the processing of the meals, and whether or not we're getting that, that overwhelming number of cars left that we didn't provide meals for. So the numbers are really not high in terms of turning people away. It's kind of been steady. So I'm monitoring that daily. We turn in our numbers daily, and we look for those things so that we can make improvements, or we need to reduce our numbers if we needed to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. And Madam Chair, if I may, I just have one additional question, and then I'll wait for the next round. This one's for the superintendent again. Mr. Superintendent, what steps is GDOE taking to potentially open up its internet services to school communities? Is it possible, and we had this conversation in an information briefing that we had last week with OTEC, is it possible to allow Wi-Fi access in maybe the campus parking lots to really help students and parents who maybe do not have internet at home to participate in distance learning, and to just give them internet access through the schools?
So I could go on and on about this, but so can Deputy Joe Sanchez, who also is leading. So to save you from that, I'm going to go ahead and just ask Deputy Joe to explain it. But definitely, internet access is just really key here, and exactly those kinds of ideas you're talking about are right on the top of our list. So go ahead, Joe. I'll let you take this one.
Thank you, Deputy Joe.
Thank you. I'll try to make it brief, but the answer basically is yes. We want to open our schools, and part of the strategy is to expand the signal, because as those groups of students that I mentioned, there are some students who may have access to a device, and sometimes they're simple devices. They may not be a computer, but they'll be like a phone. And if you notice, sometimes in the community, they're like hanging out in like mobile or McDonald's or somewhere where there's free access. So we do want to increase that ability for them to access the internet, and if that includes opening our schools, and possibly looking at some community sites, whether it be the community centers or youth centers in the community, that's been deemed allowable with our funding. So we want to put some of our funding efforts in that direction as well. Also, the discussion about opening our schools as community schools in the evening. And this was kind of an evolving discussion. When we started talking about the community centers and youth centers, one of the things that was brought up by the mayors and the individuals in those housing areas was personnel. So when we started to calculate the personnel and what those needs were, we realized, there's schools in every village. And in some cases, there's more than one school, and they're basically not used, in the afternoon or evening. So if we were to identify personnel and put out the resources that we actually already have. So we have a number of computer labs, a number of computers that are in the school that are mobile. So if we were to set up the cafeterias, or set up some of the libraries that are in the front of the school, or even some of the rooms that can be opened up in the evening, so that students at any level. So I'll give you an example. I'll use my village of Vigania Heights. Basically the elementary school is walking distance from most places. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be in the elementary school, but if you're a high school student or a middle school student, we are looking at staggered schedules, so that you don't have all the high school students there at the same time with the elementary school students, but at least there's a community center or a community-based computer lab that the students can walk to either just access the internet if they have a device of their own, or if they don't, they can use a DOE computer, which of course they can log on, because students have their own log on passwords and whatnot to get into the computer. But yes, that your thinking is exactly what we're looking at.
Thank you so much, Deputy Joe. Oh, go ahead.
If I could add, I just want to say that we also, so as part of the education stabilization funds that are coming to the island, we're talking about the use of $41.5 million, and trying to emphasize distance learning and being able to do some of the things that we hadn't been able to do because of the difficulty and the constraints on our resources. So, having schools anchor internet access in the community is definitely a key part of that strategy. But also, I know the governor also has $12.5 million on her side to deploy. So we've been talking to the Lieutenant Governor, as well as the university and Guam Community College, about hopefully working with our telecom providers to figure out where are these gaps in access across the island that we could somehow work together, whether it's public-private partnership, or somehow figure out how to build the infrastructure and connect students who are in areas that may not be in close proximity to the schools, but still need that access. So we're hoping to expand just to anywhere that there's a student. We'd like to figure out what their options are for internet access.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity. Suzos Masi.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Joe San Augustine, do you have any questions at this time?
Madam Chair, Madam Vice, I think the only thing I really have, because the superintendent seems to be answering a lot of the questions, and I like to first, number one, thank the superintendent and all of the deputies and all the folks at DOE for what you do. You know, I know that it's a hard road, you know, to travel, and I understand that because I was over the board, and I know that, and I like to thank the board members for participating. You're all doing a great job, and the people on the frontliners, kudos to them. We'll do what we need to do when we start discussing the pay. I'm happy you brought up about the $41 million because I was going to bring that up tomorrow during your budget hearing. But if you can provide all the data about it, the budget hearing will be even shorter. Because remember, tomorrow's hearing is the final part of the budget hearing. It's not the beginning; it's the end. We're not going to drag this on. We're just going to continue on, and I just hope the best for DOE and all the students, because I know you're doing everything you can within reason. And if you need help, I know that your oversight chair is going to reach out to me and says, Joe, come on, man, let's do this. And I'm going to say, yes, let's do what we need to do. And we'll just move on. We'll just do the best. But like I said, I'd like to thank you and all your deputies and all your staff and all the board members and everyone in the school. You're doing the best you can. And thank you again. Thank you, Madam Vice.
And thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Terlahi, do you have any questions?
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thanks to all from DOE and the board who are here and their testimony, and for your work during this pandemic. Your response has actually been very good, and I know I mean, there were many challenges. So I want to thank you. You've actually given us all hope that we can do things better. So particularly in getting the food out to the people of Guam, I want to thank you for that. My questions today are pretty much just. I'm just a little confused on the federal funds. To me, it sounds like two different programs: the Education Stabilization Fund, where you're getting 41.5 million, and the governor's getting 12.5 million. Is that separate from the TFAP, the Disaster Household Distribution Program? Are those two separate?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the TFAP program is through U.S. Department of Agriculture, and
Yes.
they typically provide us. USDA both is our grantor for both the school and the breakfast and lunch program, and then we are the state agency for TFAP, which is for everybody out there the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and where we receive commodities on a regular basis so we can help get it out to the community. So we expect to see a lot more support coming from TFAP. Given the federal relief bill, but that's separate from it's a total of 54 million split between the governor and GDOE, and that comes directly from U.S. Department of Education and intended for the educational purposes.
All right, and then the original Grab to Go program, how was that funded? Was that from a separate grant again from USDA or part of one of these two?
The grab and go. So the grab and go meals are basically a modification to our school breakfast and lunch program. So essentially what we were doing to serve kids in the school sites, we are now given the flexibility to serve them in outside of the school sites. So that's basically the same stream of funding that we're using, and we're working through some to do that.
All right, and so then the $1 million that was allocated to DOE, that's all I find in this Gov Guam allocation of their CARES money is only $1 million to DOE and it says for an extension of the food program. Would that be the grab and go then? You needed additional funds to extend that?
Correct. So I think so basically to run the normal school breakfast and lunch program, we get an allocation we get a reimbursement from USDA, but that doesn't cover the full cost of the program. So there is a local subsidy that is typically associated with it. So that's already been budgeted and appropriated by the legislature. The extension of the school meals into the summer is what's new. So we do have the authority to get reimbursed from the feds over the summer. but the local subsidy was estimated to be about $1 million to allow for the summer feeding. So that's the new money that was needed.
All right, great. Okay, so I'm really interested in this because DOE does look like the only kind of food system that we've got going right now, besides SNAP and besides nonprofits that are, we're doing most of it. So this is huge. And so the 41.5 million education stabilization funds says it could be used for technology, professional development, and new delivery methods of education, but also for health and safety needs. So how has this 41.5 million been allocated? Do you have a rough allocation of how you intend to allocate that out, the 41?
So we're not complete with the application yet. We've been just getting our feedback from our stakeholders and so forth. So I don't have the numbers, but we definitely want to use a portion of that amount to supply. We're looking at purchasing face masks and face shields and cleaning supplies and even the desk dividers. And then also, and those are all the materials we're looking for to provide both to employees as well as a stockpile for students. So definitely, I don't know if Joe has any additional information about any cost estimates right now, but right now we were really putting that together so that we could go out to bid when it comes time to secure those supplies. And I think the money will be there from the CARES Act. It's just we're kind of worried about the supply chain. But let me ask the Deputy Joe if he has any better.
If I could, what part of it is going to go towards technology? Because I kind of heard you say, I don't know, maybe on the radio at one point that you didn't seem to have enough to get out with the technology as you wanted to, and that you were going to ask the governor to put in her 12.5 million in order for us to just get this out. Like Joe, the deputy superintendent described earlier, just to get that out to the school parking lots even. Is that right? Or are we going to be?
Oh no. So what we're kind of asking from the governor's side is to look at all those internet access issues that are outside of the school. So whether that's other public facilities, mayor's offices, libraries, community centers, if they could look at that aspect, because that'll help not only GDOE public schools, charter schools, it'll help the private schools, as well as UOG and GCC. So that's a bigger kind of conversation about filling those gaps. And then ours from the school campuses and into the schools, we're looking at taking care.
What percentage of the 41.5 million might go towards technology then? Or
let me ask Deputy Joe if he has an estimate at this point. We're still a few days away from finalizing our application.
Yeah, I can't commit to specific numbers, but I would say probably more than 2/3. So if our share is 30 million, because I think it's a certain percentage goes to the private non-public schools. But yes, so we're looking at least 2/3 going to technology. And if I can just add, knowing that this is a one-time shot type of funding, what we've done is we've been very strategic in looking at our current funding from our consolidated grant and other funding sources, so that if those are recurring funds that happen every year, we're looking at things like subscriptions and online resources that are going to be used every year, and put the funding in that direction while using the current ESF funding, which is a one-time shot, to build up our infrastructure, to build our equipment purchases, because we know again that won't come around next year. Also, I do want to point out that part of the funding would also be used for paper-based resources, like potentially instructional materials, textbooks, and workbooks, because that's something that we've never had enough money to purchase those materials for, and now we actually have the opportunity to purchase a certain number of subjects for every single student that they in turn can take home to utilize. So it's a combination of both technology and a paper-based comprehensive curriculum approach that we're taking.
And Senator, if I just add just real quick clarification for the general public, GDOE is receiving the funding, 42 million, as the state educational agency, but it's shared between GDOE public schools, our charter schools are eligible to participate, and then all of our private schools are eligible to participate. So our Catholic schools, Harvest, St. John, St. Paul, all of them are able to be, and they have been part of this discussion to be able to ensure their allocation of resources.
I see. Okay. Is any part of this education stabilization fund, the 41.5 million, does any part of that going to meals or not?
At this point, we're not anticipating needing that for meals because of the relief that's coming through USDA. They're ramping it up on that side too. Can I just one comment on that, Senator Terlai? I just want to emphasize that we just feel the same way that you and all of the fellow senators do, is that we did the grab and go meals because we knew we had the resources and we were concerned about our students. But I would have to tell you that we weren't certain about the numbers of cars and families that would come out for support. So I think it's very humbling and worrisome and concerning, but we do see a high need and demand at the school sites for meals. So it is a concern. And as we get the TFAP commodities in, we're looking at working with our partners for what you determined, what you said was the comprehensive food support, plan. So we can not just have it in PD or at our schools, but work with mayors or other partners to continue to push food out as it's needed.
Yes, I don't know the criteria, but it looks to me like you were designated our state agency on this TFAP, disaster household distribution of food, and it's probably because of your good record in doing this, or your proven ability to do this. But do you get a specific amount? How is that going to work? Is that something that you are doing the ordering, or they're just designating you? We're going to give you this amount in food, or how does that work? What is the amount for the TFAP, and how long will that go, Superintendent? How long does that?
So the TFAP program is normally an all-year program, so we're able to provide on a monthly basis. But right now, I think what we're concerned about is that the amounts of commodities are going to be much higher if there's continued federal emergency relief being poured into the program. So it's a good thing for the community. But from an operational standpoint, our challenge is to figure out how we're going to get these bags out. Additionally, USDA has also been flexible on the qualifications and the accountability side, recognizing a lot of households have been impacted. But at some point, for instance, with the TFAP program that we just reopened in PD, it's a disaster household food distribution program that allows us to get and support any household affected by COVID-19. My understanding, though, is that if the flexibility doesn't get extended into June, then you would go back to being a SNAP recipient, TANF recipient, or a WIC recipient. So right now it's more flexible to the end of May. Then we may have to go back to the more restricted version unless the U.S. the U.S. federal government extends that flexibility.
All right. It's my understanding then that this is a program that goes on throughout the year. You have been distributing this in other ways or through another site until this COVID. Now you were distributing it through the PD warehouse, the DOE warehouse, and it might only last until June unless we get additional federal funds.
So it's been an ongoing program that we have been using the PD site, but it's kind of like this. It's once a week maybe, and people who, I've been really concerned about the fact that it's probably not accessible to more people across the island, but it is part of the food support that's been there. The challenge is when we had a government shutdown, we didn't want to continue opening the PD warehouse because usually you have a line of people lined up, and with all the social distancing and the emergency situation, we shut that down temporarily and began pushing commodities through the mayor's offices and through the nonprofit partners that we have. So Guma San Jose, Sanctuary, Catholic Charities, Salvation Army. So we've been able to push it out in different ways. We decided to reopen the PD warehouse because we were made aware that through other USDA programs, I think we have 2 or 3 vendors on island who are now going to be bringing in boxes, 10-pound boxes of fruits and so apples and citrus. and then 10 also later this month, probably I think it's frozen meats and dairy. And so with all this additional food coming in, we needed a place to be able to stage containers. And then we decided, why don't we try a drive-through operation there and see if it works? But we're still in need probably of thinking through additional sites. Whether or not they change the flexibility, I think the amount of commodities coming through will still be high enough that over the summer, we're going to need to figure out maybe alternate sites to make sure we maximize the reach. The mayors have been really helpful with the grab and go meals. So I have to commend our mayors for doing that. So you're trying not to overload everybody with these different humanitarian tasks and responsibilities. So I think the effort now is to figure out how do we take this supply and then try to distribute it in a way that it reaches more residents across the island and transportation doesn't become a big obstacle.
Yes, I appreciate that. So I've heard you speak about this, and I very much appreciate your thoughts on that. And it sounds like something that the entire government should give you their best ideas on, and how to get that distribution out, and you put it together with your experience. Like I'm sure you're working with the Homeless Coalition because you're working with those nonprofits, and great. And I want to thank you again. That's a huge service for the people. To all.
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. Senator Kelly Marsh, you're recognized.
Since Mahasi, Madam Vice Speaker Chair, putting it all together. And along with the others, I really want to say Mahasi to everyone here, the logistics that you're contending with on a daily basis and had to put together at the beginning, especially, and even looking forward, they are just enormous. And so we really appreciate all of the hard work, the diligence, the task force, the thinking through, the examining, the possibilities, all the communication it takes to make all of these programs actually reach fruition and then serve the community. So I want to start by thanking you all for that. What I'd like to ask is, I know that part of this COVID-19 response and some of the thinking outside of the box that went on was working with PBS and the PBS University. So if you could perhaps describe a little bit of that, the ways that you think that it is reaching the students, the successes and maybe even the challenges, but also if it has potential to go forward and be useful for the year 2021.
I'll start and I'll turn it over to Joe because, again, this is something we both have been very passionate about. PBS was interested in helping, but we definitely wanted to take advantage of that when we were going through our distance learning options. We understood not everybody had connections online or computers, but in the event they had a television, we wanted to be able to point them somewhere where they could get continued instruction. And so before I turn it over, I just want to say I've watched those lessons. Our teachers are really doing a great job, adjusting to a different mode of teaching and learning. And I do hope, and we do plan to continue to integrate PBS integrate them more into the future plans for distance learning. So let me turn that over to Deputy Joe for additional information.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, Senator, for that question. Yes, PBS was wonderful. They actually were the ones who reached out to us and kind of offered that service. And we started off with English language arts, math, and character education, life skills. The successes are really is our teachers. We were able to find a pool of teachers who were willing to be able to videotape themselves and do the work at home. I want to commend them. They've done an incredible job. Some of them have to, so a lot of them have kids, so they have to kind of put their kids to bed. So some of them are taping these things at night, and sometimes they have to do multiple takes. And again, this is all done remotely. So they've never gone into the studio. So they communicate with the PBS employees and they give them the scripts and everything. So it does take a substantial amount of time. But because after a while they start getting into the groove, we're hoping that we can actually expand. So PBS has offered to continue over the summer. So we're happy to say that it's going to continue over the summertime as well. And we're looking at possibly continuing into fall. And when fall happens, what we can do is we are now looking at aligning the lessons to our regular curriculum. So whatever gets taught during the regular time of the day can get reinforced in a video lesson in PBS. We hope to expand in terms of time, because right now we knew that one of the strategies is cutting down each of the lessons into video clips. So the actual lesson itself is between 7 to 10 minutes, because that tends to be the attention span of young kids, and in some cases even older kids and even adults when they're watching a video online. So we actually have them shortened, but we do want to consider expanding it in terms of how long the lessons, more content, as well as the number of lessons that get covered. So we want our number of subjects that get covered. So we're hoping to add social studies, we're hoping to add science, and the frequency, because right now it's just once a week. So you basically get one lesson in English language arts for 1 week, one lesson in math for 1 week, and the rest is kind of practice. We hope to increase that frequency. We are allocating a certain amount of funding in the ESF to support the production of video lessons and the broadcasting of video lessons. We are told that, of course, we can't just choose PBS. I mean, we have to put that out to bid for professional services. But this particular type of activity is something we want to continue, and we think it could be a great supplement to our regular school year.
That's all very good to hear. And, you know, I believe I've heard GDOE speak before about having a high number of students that don't have access to the internet, but it's true, perhaps most all of us, if not all of us, do have access to television. And that was very innovative thinking on everybody's part to utilize this. And it's very interesting to hear that the teachers are able to do this at home. So they're able to practice all the social distancing in many ways, even though it might be juggling between family obligations and teaching obligations, but we really appreciate them stepping up and doing that. Is there any way at this point to gauge the viewership, or has PBS or something else that you've come across helped you figure out how you might view that? One of the things off the top of my head is if there's an assignment, it has to be turned in, well, then you can really tell if people have been tuning in. But are there ways that you are aware of?
So we haven't really, I don't know if we've checked in with the PBS, Joe, but I would say that obviously during this particular time period where we didn't impose grading and as part of the distance learning, that of course, you know, we recognize that there may not be the same motivation that they would have coming this year when we're going to require assignments to be turned in and graded. So we hope to, you know, focus more on ensuring and accounting for the student participation as part of the distance learning strategy. But I will say also that, you know, the PBS lessons, they are on TV and they are replayed, you know, numerous times during the week, but they also have a YouTube channel where they also put the lessons on the internet, basically. And so that enables us to incorporate that into our distance learning strategies, you know, for everybody, whether it's through internet access or through the television. It gives us more options. So we think this is the start of, you know, a really good partnership. I know that public television in general has seen better days, but in this pandemic, I mean, there's a glimmer of hope that I think we can utilize public television to really enhance the teaching and learning that needs to take place under these conditions.
Well, it's very good to hear that there are these multiple strategies, because it's true, we have to look at any availability out there, and it sounds like it's had quite a few successes and that it has the ability to grow. So that's very good to hear. And even some of the repetition, kids may actually enjoy that part of it, to watch a lesson again and things like that. and having it available through YouTube so that the phone, computer, TV, that there's all that overlay. The other question that I had, and then I can save others for later, but the other question that I had is for the task force and looking forward for the school year. On Guam, we're very familiar with double sessions. They've come into play through various times, through typhoons or buildings of schools or other things like this. Has any of that discussion been looking at year-round schooling as a way to alleviate the number of students on campus at a time?
Go ahead, Deputy Joe, do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yes, thank you. Right now, a lot of the options are still really on the table, but I can speak to an example of the double session recommendation that came up. And this is kind of the same situation with almost any recommendation when is defining how that particular strategy is actually deployed. Now, the term double session has been used in a variety of ways, and the challenge is what keeps coming up is they refer to when GW was housing JFK and GW, and they called that a double session. Well, that's not the kind of double session that we're talking about when we're trying to reduce the number of student population. That's kind of like, yeah, they call it a double session, but it's actually a split session where you have a full campus, a full student body, a full faculty in the morning, and then an entirely different school in the same building. That's happened when a building was either had to be renovated or a school had to be shut down because of the typhoon or whatnot. The double session that is in discussion that will limit the number of students on campus is actually taking the same faculty, the same staff, and everybody and splitting them up into two groups. That's something that almost everybody that we've spoken to has told us, do not do that. The 12-month staff, the principals who have been involved in that, they remember how taxing that is, because basically the school is operating from early morning all the way to sometimes in the late evening. So if you don't have a strategy to almost double or spread out the faculty and staff, it becomes very tiring for those who have to work both sessions. And in some cases, it's unavoidable with certain teachers, especially if you have to teach in the earlier times and at the end. So one of the things that we looked at is the feasibility of staggered scheduling or alternate scheduling, where students come on particular days. We're also looking at the nature of how those groups are made. So if you have, let's say 50% is our capacity, it's really just an A-B schedule. There's a group A, there's a group B, and then they alternate throughout the week. If we find out the capacity has to be 1/3, then you just do 3 groups, A, B, C, and then they tend to alternate. Now, based on the groupings, there's also options for just like how you kind of mentioned year-round schooling or spreading out the schedule and doing different types of sequences. So for example, I know there's a district that looks at 1 week on and 1 week off, where it allows the students to be on campus for 1 full week, and then the next group comes in and does the same thing. So there's different ways that you can play with the sequencing depending on what your particular focus is. The challenges with things like year-round schooling or extending the school year, it might run into issues with payment and salaries, because there's a particular finite schedule that teachers are paid on. But again, a lot of these things are still on the table, and I will say that the union is currently involved in our discussion. We had a meeting with the vice president of the union yesterday, and he's aware of that are being discussed, and we intend to continue to include them as well as parents, as well as students and the community in those discussions, as well as and other agencies like DPW and busing.
So just Masi for providing all of that information. And this speaks to what I was saying at the beginning. You guys have your task force and you've been looking in so many directions, and it's really reassuring for us to hear, because all of this is going to take quite a bit of logistics and changing a lot of the framework. Year-round schooling may be kind of the biggest of them all, and so that one may be the more difficult, but these other ways of alternating the scheduling are really interesting to hear. And as a former instructor, I can see how there's potential in them. 1 week on, 1 week off, and then you give certain assignments in between that the student can be more self-paced, or, those I think are more manageable. Year-round, I think, has some benefits potentially, but it's such a logistical switch, and it maybe has larger community implications along with the others you mentioned. But thank you so much for sharing all of the hard work that you guys are doing thus far, and I'll save a question or two for the next round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kelly Marsh. Senator Pito, I'm sorry, sir. Yours seem to be at the top.
I'm the oldest one, so no problem. I can wait. Anyway, John, where you from?
Sorry, from Jonia.
You're from Jonia, okay. I just wanted to kind of just move up the adrenaline. Anyway, I want to thank you, John, Mark Mendiola, and Mrs. Gutierrez, Kelly Sacola, Joe Sanchez, and Stacy Caleta, and Nadine and Jenny. I want to thank you all for doing a good job. I only have one question because, John, I want to ask you this. How many first liners do you have on hand right now? Or your expectation of the numbers of first liners do you have?
So we're talking about our first liners, our frontliners. These will be
the employees.
So we have about 44 school nurses who who've been directed to report to public health. We have about 10 social workers who are also reporting under the governor's authority. And I believe we have about 10, I'm looking at my deputies, about 10 school resource officers, or attendance officers basically, who are assisting the quarantine. And then at our school sites, we have about 250 people on a daily basis at 12 school sites. So those would be the ones that we're considering the front line, being either exposed to the grab and go or actually working directly with COVID-19 cases or quarantine situations.
So you have over 300.
Correct.
Okay, and the reason why I ask you this, John, because we do have an issue on deciding where to go in as far as supporting the first line employees that you have, and we're gonna come out with a conclusion on just what we need to do to satisfy all these employees. As you know, there's some issues on some of the bills that are coming out, and we're gonna discuss that with the chair. And I want to thank you, Chair, for holding this informational hearing, because it's important that we do arrive at the conclusion that is satisfying to everybody, especially those people that have been working during this pandemic. And that's all the questions that I want to ask, because I want to make sure that the people that are working during this pandemic are given what is merit to them. And I want to thank you, John. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pito. Minority Leader, Senator Titagui, do you have any questions at this time?
Yes, thank you. Before I say hi to everyone, and staying on the same line as the last senator spoke, Mr. Fernandez, over 300 individuals on the front line. Have you estimated how much this will cost in double pay?
So we don't have, I don't think we have the full number, but I think we're looking at, if we look to the end of the month, I would venture to guess between $2 to $3 million since the beginning of the pandemic.
Thank you. And thank you so much. I just wanted to stay on that same line and get your mind still in that category. So I appreciate it. About $2 to $3 million. It's a big gap, so I appreciate it. Maybe later on today, if you can give us almost an exact amount of money, that'll help us to know. I thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate it. To the board as well as the associate superintendent. Thank you, Joe. As always, I've known you for years, when you were a teacher, then a principal, and now where you're at, and you're still as workaholic as ever, handling all these programs. So thank you for all your hard work that you're doing. Nadine, Thank you so much for the information you're providing. I remember you in a public hearing before. We were talking about some other circumstances that needed some help, and I'm glad that we were able to help you. Does your services also go into helping the charter schools as well with their scenarios? Any kind of issues that they may have that you may provide some kind of assistance there for the charter schools?
Hi, Senator Taitino. So I've
Taitagui.
Oh, sorry, Taitagui.
It's
Sorry,
okay.
Taitagui. Senator Taitagui, my apologies.
No problem.
I've only planned for DOE. I know in the past I've worked with one charter school because at the time it was the former Senator Wampat who had requested that we work closely with the counselor and we include them in our PDs. So when we do have professional development, we extend that. So at this time, I could say that I did not, again, work with the charter schools. This was the plan that I had proposed for the recovery plan was actually for DOE, staff and students.
I see. So is there any plans later on, Superintendent, to incorporate the assistance of DOEs for those in special needs and services?
Right. So as part of the Education Stabilization Fund, the third anchor, in addition to the personal protective equipment and distance learning, is the mental health supports. So I've asked Nadine as part of the recovery plan to ensure that we have an estimate of what's needed to support her efforts. And all those efforts, the charter schools and the private schools would be eligible to participate in. So if there are materials, if there are trainings that are needed, and as any part of the funding, they would definitely be able to participate. Now, all of our non-public schools have an opportunity to both to have given input and also to elect whether or not they want to participate. So that conversation is ongoing, but I do know that our charter schools were part of that conversation last week.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. And the grab and go has been such a success, and everybody has recognized all the hard work that you're doing. And I greatly appreciate it. We're getting a lot of kudos. In fact, today they mentioned that they started up at FBLG again, and they're trying to get the word out there to let parents and students know that they can come back and pick it up. So this also includes any students in the charter schools as well that can receive this, or is it just for DOE, Guam DOE students?
Actually, it's for any individual from 0 to 18 years of age. And it doesn't matter whether you come from a public school, charter school, private school. In fact, DODEA students are also participating.
DODEA.
So we do see children and families from every sector of the education system, and even those who are not yet entering kindergarten. So even our kids from 0 to 5 are eligible to be given meals.
And that funding that you said you received for the grab and go, which is partially from USDA as well as local funding. And considering program is through the school year and through the summer that you're doing it, what happens in the event that school is not ready to start on its normal time in August, and that you need to extend that a little more, maybe till September? Do you have enough funding until the end of the fiscal year to continue to provide that local funding needed to keep the grab and go going until school starts?
So, the local funding that was provided in our budget was meant to account for the entire fiscal year, which takes us to the end of September. So once we get back up and running, that money should be available. The additional $1 million that was provided and requested from the governor was just to cover the gap over the summer. So other than that, we should be able to restart based on the school year start.
Okay, something that's
the flexibility to go with, so if we do delay the school year, we would probably have to go back to USDA to extend the school meal program beyond July 30th, the grab and go program beyond July 31st. So that would be an additional step in the event that we have to delay the school year.
You must have read my mind because that was the next question on the USDA side, because I'm sure that on the local side, we're standing by ready to assist any way we can. to ensure this really successful program that's up and running is continuing on, and anything that you need to move forward. The one that was mentioned early in PD that was going on, that's a Monday and Wednesday thing that was also on the radio today, and getting a lot of kudos from that. So thank you again for all your hard work and all your staff, associate superintendents, as well as Nadine that are there. And Mr. McNitt, I see you there. Thank you so much for, even though I see your picture there. Thank you for being here, and also Mark Mendiola. Thank you so much.
Okay, I just have a couple questions just to follow up, Superintendent. First, I'd like to start with we talked about the counselors' roles at the Guam Department of Education. There was training mentioned on how they will initiate telehealth. When have they received this training yet? And if not, when will they receive? I believe I asked this question a couple weeks ago. So is there a definite date now that we will see the counselors being trained? And is this what will be their primary focus?
Okay, so let me have Nadine answer the details on that. But right now, since we closed the schools, there hasn't, I would say that our clinicians have been active in contacting the most at-risk students. I don't believe we could say that we had consistency across the school system for counselors and so forth, because we were in shutdown mode and we were working on these other programs. But as we've gone through it, Nadine and the deputy Kelly Sokola, we've been talking about exactly what you've been talking about, the mental health supports, how we're going to partner with behavioral health and get through the summer and then prepare for the school year. So Nadine has been asked to chair this mental health support side of the recovery task force. The counselors are invited and part of that work, or representatives of the counselors are part of that work. And maybe she can just give an update on that situation and what training has been already completed and what training may be needed as we enter the school year. Nadine?
Hi, yes. Hi, Vice Speaker. And so I want to touch up. So I did mention that counselors have been trained in trauma-informed care. I've been with the department for the last 5 years, and it's been ongoing. We do talk very specifically about social emotional, things that we can look and identify how to help them. So they're given a lot of training throughout the years. However, as this pandemic came up and a lot of the readings come up, that it surfaces a lot of things. Just to know, on like superintendent had mentioned, it's a rough draft. In the very beginning, it mentions that it's a domino effect, senators, that if someone is pressured with pandemic, loss of job and wages, the family feels it, they're a system. It impacts their kids. Then they become hungry, maybe homelessness. Then the pressure will come up. I mean, again, it will put pressure on the family, the system, and then that's when we see huge problems. DOE works very closely with Guam Behavioral Health, and I work very closely with the Deputy Carissa Pangilinan. Again, she sees a rise that more people are coming in. They had to change some of their stuff and do telehealth. She just reassured me that they're put money aside for some of us to get the actual training to be certified in telehealth. And also I have to mention, I'm also part of Guam Psychological Association and the Association of Individual Marriage and Family Therapists. Clearly, there's a need in our community for practitioners to get the help they need for telehealth. When we see that everyone stopped seeing people face to face. I'm also a board member of the Guam Coalition that I've asked for funding to get someone out here to do a webinar to provide that and open up to all providers. So with that in mind, we have already trained the school counselors, and what better yet, if we think about it, the process is we need to think out of the box. The counselors have their masters, they need the training. So we identified 4 different four screeners, because a big thing is they don't want to say they're therapists. We're not having them change the roles. We're just going to have them focus a little more on tapping into the social and emotional needs of our students and our staff. So the training has not occurred specifically for these 4 screeners that I identified, because this has been in the planning since April. And so we kind of want to get those trainings as soon as we can. We're trying to do that, and that was part of, can I, Senator, really quick share with my draft on what I have proposed on phase 1, 2, and 3. Would that be okay? And I would do that.
Yes, please. So yeah, so just to understand the timeline for the counselors to be trained in telehealth, right? Because it was mentioned that they would be assisting the families and the students.
Yes.
Time. And so it would, I don't know if they're actually trained in telehealth. That wasn't made clear earlier. So are they trained in telehealth so that they can do this now? And
They're actually not. And in my thing, it says outreach. So thank you. And I should clarify. So the telehealth are really for the clinical behavioral clinicians. And when we talk about the telephone for the school counselors, that's considered outreach. And so I do know some of the counselors had said that that's what they would do. Some counselors have told me, I don't want my number to be given to the families. Understood. Those are things we are considering in our subcommittee. How can we tap in right now as we do follow up? Because then as teachers, they're on break, right? So one of the things is we do have work team leaders, and they were voted among their colleagues. They're in our committee. We had our first committee meeting or subcommittee this morning. And so we are trying to address that. And they're representing their colleagues, the school counselors, and how we can address that if they need to block their phone. But if it's their bill, that's things that we have discussed, but we're trying to see how we can do that. I do know that some of the kids that do have access thought FaceTime was more acceptable. We're right now, I put this out there to say school counselors know their students best. They can identify those at-risk kids, the ones that come into the school unwashed. What's happening now? And so we want to ensure that we are taking care of those kids. What better? Those counselors at those school sites know these kids, identify them, and make a call. We do say if they can't make a call, you document it. Sometimes they don't have a phone. Oftentimes they don't. What other forms of means can we reach out? And that's the stuff that we're looking at, expanding that outreach to those kids that are not able to have access to a phone. So we are looking at that, Senator.
So, Vice Speaker, if I could jump in, we're happy to share our detailed, recovery discussions, as after this hearing, and we can provide that to you for for more details. I would say, just in general, though, I appreciate what you're asking, and as you can tell, it's a big challenge to try to provide these services in this completely different situation where we're now, like you said, shifting to telehealth. My biggest concern, of course, is going to be, and I've talked to Nadine about this, is over the summer when kids are out, because then we almost lose our ability to interact with them, and that's where the partnership with behavioral health is going to be important, and really getting out into the community and saying, this is where you can call if you need support. As we enter the school year, and part of the task force discussion is we do need to identify these gaps. Gaps in training in particular are going to be important. So even though I'm not going to, we haven't made a decision on this yet, but one of the things I've tasked the task force to consider is to make sure that before any child sets foot in the school facility, whether it's on the staggered schedule, whatever schedule it is, before any student sets foot in the facility, that we ensure that sufficient time for training is provided up front for teachers, administrators, and staff, because we're about to enter a completely new type of school year. And we can't just start up immediately and think we know what we're doing. So I think part of this will be for the counselors as well, to shore up and to receive additional training needed to adapt to our situation. But the same thing for teachers around distance learning, administrators around safety and safety protocols. A lot of that has to be built in. So that's being considered now as to how to effectively deliver that preparation and training prior to getting any student back into a school facility. So that's just for your information, but we'll provide our response in more detail early next week on the mental health side.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, and thank you, Nadine, because that is a concern of mine that you mentioned, that the families are losing their jobs, and so there's even more burden on the child. And many times, as a student, your break away from home is going to school, and so especially those that are having issues within their families and struggling in their families, their escape is school and education. And so, I just want to make sure that we, if there's something that the legislature needs to do to provide additional appropriation, or if we can work around your budget to ensure that we help these children during this time, then please let us know. The next question I have, and I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll probably send them to you via email, and if you can respond to the rest, because we do have one of our colleagues with an oversight or hearing coming up. The next question that I wanted to ask was, out of the Education Stabilization Fund, what is the breakdown, or has the breakdown been finalized for the amounts that would go to the Guam Department of Education, that would be utilized for the private schools, and that would be utilized with the charter schools?
We have that breakdown. I could send that to you in a response, the specific breakdown, but it's approximately, because it's based on enrollment. So it would be approximately, I believe, about $31 million for the DOE public schools, and then the remainder by enrollment to the charter schools, private schools, and charter schools.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, if you could just pick the most important questions that you feel that we can move forward, so we can adjourn and prepare for the next hearing at 1 o'clock. Thank you. I'll call on Senator Terlahi, Therese Terlahi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just wanted to point out to DOE that when we had our recent hearing with the Office of Technology, they gave us the impression that they had not been in discussions with you regarding, the expansion of technology. And I know that the Lieutenant Governor said he has been in discussions with you, but I am hoping that these will be a coordinated, community-wide effort that we can, all benefit from. But I just want to find out, how soon will you do your plans foresee implementing that type of system, or an expanded technology system at least?
So currently, so you're asking a couple of questions on the coordination with the governor's office. My conversations have been primarily with Lieutenant Governor and, of course, Dr. Ricky Hernandez as part of the recovery effort, and then and also with my colleagues, Dr. Okada at GCC and Dr. Kreis at UOG. So it's been primarily with the Lieutenant Governor in those discussions about expanding internet access in the community. With regard to within GDOE and our public schools and also our non-public schools, what we plan to do is finalize our application for funding support early next week, and then hopefully they're promising, if everything's in order, promising a quick turnaround at USDOE. And I've learned not to give a date because I don't know when the federal government will approve it, but they've promised to expedite it. So we're hoping that within the next couple of weeks we will have funding in our accounts to be able to deploy and procure what's needed. So I know that early in the early stage, we're going to be focusing on procuring a lot of equipment to come in. Those are the laptops, for instance, that would be needed for students. And then we would go out and procure services to help do the retrofits at our school sites. So those could include potentially, making sure that classrooms are better situated for technology, but also looking at, given the social distancing, looking at cafeterias and gymnasiums to be able to equip them to be potential classrooms, since there you can spread out students in a better configuration, and then also to enhance the school's ability to provide Wi-Fi access beyond the classroom. So hopefully, as a community hub. So those, in terms of timing, Joe, do you have any better estimates of how you see the phases unrolling?
Yeah, so we're basically looking at some of these principles, and the principle behind it is everything that we can do now, we want to do as quickly as possible. So some of those things include the paper-based curriculum and making sure that teachers are trained and teachers are ready to look at their curriculum that they have now from a paper-based standpoint and augmenting that to ensure that students are able to do work either on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis and so on. We have a lot of technology that is already on campus. So what we're doing now is taking a little inventory and knowing that not every student is going to be on campus already. We feel that the distribution of computers on campus, we're able to actually service more students now, because if it's 1/3 of the population or 1/4 of the population, we might have enough to ensure that a student has a computer for that day in their particular class. And we want, as much as possible, every teacher to already do that. The evening sessions, we want to open that as soon as possible, as quickly as probably the opening of school, because those can be achieved with our current our current equipment that we already have in the schools. So it's really taking the equipment that we have during the day and then making them available in the evening when students come in. So there's a lot that we're already planning to have done as soon as the first semester. But then we also have a substantial order of computers that are supposed to come in. We have an order of additional laptops, and we intend to order more, which should be coming in before the end of the calendar year, as well as orders that we intend to place, and they usually take a couple of about 2 months to get here. So another order that's supposed to come in the spring, and those are all not even with the ESF funds yet. Those are just with current consolidated grant funds. So when the ESF funds become available, that's an additional set of resources that will be available to the department with a similar timeline.
And if I could also add, Senator Terlai, one of the issues that we are concerned about, which could affect the timeline and phases, is the availability of supplies and equipment and services. So this not only applies to the distance learning piece, but also to the safety supplies and so forth. So we're learning that as we're moving forward to procure, everybody else is, all these other school districts across the country here on Guam, competing for the same types of resources. So we're starting to get word, that of where we might see concerns, and that'll be our biggest challenge to figure out, not just having the funding in place, but to procure them and get them in on a timely basis. So that could be an open-ended situation.
Sure. Again, I'm looking forward to those plans. That's incredible that you've made all those plans even before the ESF. So fantastic. That's good news. And I'm looking forward to swift implementation. Again, I want to thank all of you at DOE for the foundation you have built, the safety net you have helped the government of Guam to build for the people of Guam. And thank you so much. Thank you for all your work. Take care.
Thank you, Senator Terlai. Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and again, thank you to everyone for being on the call. Most of my questions have already been answered, but maybe Deputy Sanchez, if you can just talk a little bit more about the other technology that you will be implementing. Is there any discussion of MiFis being purchased to loan out to students who maybe live further from the schools, in addition to expanding the access in the parking lots and opening some parts of the schools? I know that the University of Guam is doing this, and we have this program at our libraries. Is that something that you're also discussing?
Yeah, so part of the community-based access includes and possibly housing areas that are not easily kind of accessible to the internet. We also know that some of the places don't have a very good signal to begin with. So we're looking at also seeing if we can find ways to subsidize student access, like how they have prepaid cards and whatnot. So if there's particular assignments, if there are ways that students can get those available to them. The MiFis themselves are not very efficient. I mean, they're good if you know that you're going to service multiple students in a particular area, but they do have the technology where they have hubs that are portable. So if you have a portable hub, I mean, that's what like a lot of these big companies here in Guam use anyway, where it's just a hub that you can basically just plug into the wall and it sends a signal out for all of people around it. So those are some of the options that we're looking at to try to service a group of students at a time in a particular area. But for individual checkout, yeah, we've talked about those devices, and they're not necessarily very economical, because if you buy a device that services 6 to 10 and you're only giving it to one student, that's kind of a waste of the resource. But for individual student use, we have discussed the possibility of either prepaid internet or somehow subsidizing internet connections for their homes.
Okay, great.
So if I could add that, that's the discussion we're having with Lieutenant Governor and UOG and GCC, and we're looking forward. We had asked to see if we can meet with our telecom partners, because we really want to understand access from the standpoint of the provider, so that when we align our supports and our services, they match up. So it's going to take a better understanding of their infrastructure. I mean, some of that infrastructure is active, some of that infrastructure may be latent. It'll be better to understand from their perspective whether we're talking about vouchers for families versus more infrastructure investment. So there's a lot of unanswered questions here. So I think, but what Joe's been focusing on has been the classroom out. How do we start in the classroom and then go out? I'm looking at what we do from the community to connect, those gaps, and hopefully we can bring those conversations together, beyond the school campuses. So I think, we don't have all the answers for that, but it is definitely going to depend on, what infrastructure is in place, in terms of fiber infrastructure, Wi-Fi, towers and sites, and then where we see the access, the need for access out in the community. And then maybe we can do what we were talking about, either making the schools as hubs or looking at mobile, school. We hear about school bus Wi-Fi hubs, where you equip a school bus to be in a certain area for a certain time and allow students in that area to access. So the different strategies are out there, and they're all on the table at this point.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I recognize that you are working diligently, hitting this from all angles. I'm, especially concerned about just that lack of engagement between students and teachers, especially the students who don't have the Wi-Fi connectivity. And, like as it's been said here in the mental health discussion, that schools and teachers are many times safe havens for these students. And so we want to make sure they continue to have that support, beyond the family, beyond the home, that they know that there's somewhere else that they can go for help. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Legislative Secretary. Senator Clint, you're recognized.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I believe we have come to our end of the informational hearing. Superintendent, Deputy Sanchez, Zenny, Dr. Sukola, Stacy, Nadine, Chairwoman of the Board, Mrs. Gutierrez, and I think I saw Mark here earlier. And Dr. McNinch, thank you for being here. I want to thank the Guam Department of Education and all their employees for the outstanding job and service that they provided to our community and our island and our families. Like Senator Talahi said, you guys have been the safety net, especially when it was dealing with a lot of meals distribution. And also I look forward to the expansion of the counseling programs to help our students during the summer and as we move forward into the school year. And we will be praying for you guys because we know you have a lot on your plate, and I'm trying not to bother, the deputies or the superintendent so much. I'm just trying to give him his space so he can operate. And so thank you so much for taking the time to come to this informational hearing. Thank you for sharing the great efforts that you have done. And we look forward to more great works coming out of the Guam Department of Education. And good luck at the budget hearing tomorrow. See you there. Thank you, everyone. God bless you.